Hi there, this is Tracy Kiernan from stepbysteppainting.net, and in this acrylic painting tutorial I'm going to show you how to paint this Sunset Road painting on an 11 by 14 inch canvas. I'm going to start right away, and the first thing I want to do is find the very center of my painting. So my painting is in portrait mode, and the composition has this horizon line going right down the center of the painting. So just any ruler, straight edge, find the middle of the painting and draw a horizontal line. Next, we're going to paint the sky. So what I'm going to do, because the sky is a thin layer of color, I'm going to go ahead and use my 3/4 inch flat wash brush, and I'm actually going to apply a very thin coat of water to the entire sky of the painting. So I'm basically using a clean brush. There's no water or there's no paint on it, obviously. It's just the water, and I'm brushing on a very thin layer. If you're working on an easel, you don't want it so wet to where it's dripping, because if it's dripping, that's too much water. Just enough to make a very, very thin layer of water that's not dripping. And I'm only going to do this to the top part of the sky, so everything above that horizontal line is going to have that thin layer of water. Then I'm going to go ahead and load my palette in the 3 colors that I'll be using for the sky. Actually, I'm just going to load with the 1 color for now. This is Cadmium Red Medium Hue, and I'll still be using that flat wash brush. So load it in the red, and we're going to apply it to the very top of the painting. And because we have a thin layer of water at the top, it's going to spread very fast. So you'll only need a little bit of that red right there at the top. In fact, I probably loaded more red on my palette than I needed for that area. But I'm only going to go down about 3 or 4 inches with that red, and then I'll be blending in a different color called Quinacridone Magenta. So just brush it on evenly, left and right, back and forth. So you don't want to see any harsh strokes. You want to make sure that your brush goes all the way across the canvas. We're not stopping in the middle. And then if you're working on a stretched canvas like I am here, you can paint the sides. And this painting design actually looks very lovely when you extend the painting on the sides of the canvas. So I'm going to do that for this painting. I'm going to make sure that I get the sides painted as well. The next color I'm going to load on my palette is Quinacridone Magenta. And again, you only need a little bit of it. I'm going to wipe my brush off with a rag. So instead of cleaning it off, I'm just going to wipe off that red. And that's going to help with the blending of the red and the quina, because I already have a little bit of red on my brush. So I'm going to load it in the quina. So when I say quina, I mean this magenta color. And I'm going to apply it below the red, and I'm going to gently brush it up into the red. So that part that I'm brushing right there, I call that the transition zone where the 2 colors meet. I work that area by brushing over it several times. And when you keep brushing over it several times, that's how those 2 colors are going to blend together in that transition zone. And then once you have the Quinacridone Magenta and the red blended together, then you can take that magenta and apply it below, and we're going to go down, not all the way to the horizon, but pretty far, a little bit further than the red, I suppose, but not all the way down. So leave about a 3 or 4 inch gap of white space above the horizon line, and then go ahead and paint the sides of your canvas as well. The The next color we're going to load our palette with is titanium white. So you can see the space that I have left. It's about 3 fingers width of space, or 2 to 3 inches. It doesn't have to be exact. And again, I'm not going to rinse my brush off. I'm going to use my rag to wipe my brush. So that's going to help with the blending because I already have that color right there. Grab a big chunk of white on my brush, start below the magenta, and then brush the white up into it. Work that transition area so that you paint over it several times to let the white blend with the magenta. If you have a streak of white that kind of accidentally got up into the sky, that's okay. It's a sunset, so it doesn't have to be a perfect gradient of the colors. We can have some floating white streaks in the sky. Perhaps they're clouds or they're just different color variations in the sky. And just gently blend that white. The white needs to be nice and bright right along the horizon line because that is where the sun is setting. So that's the brightest part of our sky. And then go ahead and paint the sides of the canvas as well. I'm going to go ahead and rinse my brush, and I'm going to add a second coat of red right at the top of the sky. This is this is optional, but I feel like my paint is really thin up there, probably because it was the fresh water on the surface of the canvas when I first applied the red, but that's okay. I'm just going to take this red and apply a second coat. Also makes the top part of the sky a little bit darker in that area. And teeny bit of magenta. I'm not going to go all the way down and do a second coat everywhere. I just wanted to do the second coat right there at the top of the sky. When you're done with that brush, rinse it off and set it aside and grab your painter's tape. So with this painter's tape, this is actually masking tape. We're going to define our road. So this is a 1-point perspective painting, but the road is not going to a point. The top part of the road is actually flat because it turns, and my tape is going at an angle, obviously, but look at the side of the canvas. It's not going to the corner. There's some space on the bottom above the corner. So try to get your lines to be pretty consistent on each side or a mirror of each other. So I use that straight edge T-square to kind of line up the bottom piece to make sure that they're kind of even at the bottom. So you can see the space on the bottom of the road right there. It doesn't go to the corners. There's some space, and the top piece is flat. So it doesn't go to the point because our road is going to be turning to the left in this painting. So you want to kind of take your fingers and press down on that tape so it's nice and sticky right there on the canvas. And when we paint our road in, when we pull the tape up, there'll be a nice straight line. So I'm going to load my palette with 2 different blacks. This one's actually Payne's Gray, and the other one is Mars Black. And so the road consists of Payne's Gray. So don't let that confuse you as to why I loaded my palette with Mars Black. We're actually going to paint the road Payne's Gray first. And I'm using the 3/4 flat brush, the same brush we used for the sky. And I'm just going to go ahead and paint, but my direction of the strokes are going to be going in an angle because of the way my road is. So I'm not painting horizontal strokes this time. I'm painting diagonal strokes, starting from the bottom of the road. Do not go all the way up with the Payne's Gray. Go about halfway and leave the rest blank because we'll be blending in white to make the road look like it's lighter way in the distance. So just fill this whole bottom area, diagonal strokes forming the shape of the road, and then paint the sides of your canvas as well. Next, we're going to blend in some white. So wipe off your brush with that rag or paper towel. And this top area is a lighter gray. So I grabbed white on my brush. And again, I'm going to paint in diagonal strokes. And I'm going to blend that white into the gray. So use the full width of the brush, and I'm just kind of dragging that white into the gray and dragging it back up, and it's going to make this streaky look with the gray And that's what we want. We want to kind of see that the texture that it's forming on the road there. So just taking that white and blending it at an angle. And it doesn't have to be a perfect blend. It could be that the sun's hitting the road in different ways and creating different variations of the color and shadow. So we don't have to go for perfection here. And we want the top part to be even lighter. So I'm actually going to get my piece of tape and apply it right there horizontally so that I don't paint over the sky or anything. And I'm just going to take that white and drag it down into that other shade of gray in there. And it may end up being that same shade of gray, but we want to do the best we can to make this furthest piece of the road light. So that creates perspective in our painting. When things are way in the distance, they're a lot lighter versus things that are closer and that's darker. That's going to make our road look like it has distance. And then I'm going to try to add a bit more white up here, but there's a lot of gray up there and that gray is super strong. It may be that it's not going to blend as easily and turn lighter. So just a few streaks of that white, but we're not going to plan on it being too bright at this point. If anything, we can wait for this road to dry and try to add a bit more white later, but I think this looks fine like this. I'm just going to brush a few more strokes in there. Try not to overblend. We don't want it to all be the same color. And then at the very bottom, it's important that the very bottom is pure Payne's gray. So that's the darkest part of our road, the darkest part, the closest part of the road in the painting. Has to be super dark. So I just took that Payne's gray and made sure that bottom part was super dark. You don't have to wait for that paint to dry to pull the tape off, so I'm just going to go ahead and gently pull this off. And if you have a little streaks showing through like I did in the sky, that's okay. My mountains ended up covering that up anyway. And if there's a little gray showing through on the white area where the land is, that's okay because that's going to be painted over with black. But for the most part, we have a nice defined road right now. And I'm going to go ahead and switch brushes here. I am going to use this number 8 round brush to paint my mountain range that's way in the distance above the horizon line. And this mountain range is a light gray color. So I'm going to mix on my palette using the Mars Black, just a teeny bit of Mars Black and a whole bunch of titanium white to make a very light gray. And you can kind of see the shade of gray that I'm making. It's lighter than the lightest part of the road. And I'm just going to use my brush, the tip of the brush, to define the top part of my mountain range. So paint a wavy, uneven line all the way across your canvas. And then everything below that line is painted in with that light gray color. Now, to create some landscape perspective in your mountains, we can have the bottom part of the mountain be lighter and the top part be darker. But keep in mind, so we're not going to get too detailed about these mountains. If you look at the final picture, most of those mountains, they're going to be covered up by trees. So we don't really need to make perfect mountains here. We're just going to paint them in. Maybe we'll kind of do a little bit of shading, but is the shading necessary? Not really. I'm just doing it kind of for fun. I'm making the bottom part lighter and the top part a little bit darker. And so you can do that too, or you can just paint it solid gray. Okay, We know this area over here on left and right is covered with trees, but the ground has to be a color. And so what I'm going to do is paint the base color of the ground, and the base color is used with Mars Black. And so I'm going to take my painter's tape here and use it to kind of help me not go over that road. And what I'm doing with my tape here is I'm actually getting some of the stickiness off of it by putting it on my rag and pulling it off. So that'll take some of the stickiness off of the tape so that when I go and pull it off later, it's not going to pull any of the paint off of the canvas. It's going to allow me to not paint over the road when I do the black, but it's also going to allow it so it doesn't pull the tape up, pull the paint off of the tape. So I'm going to apply it to that area, and then I'm going to take my Mars Black and I'm going to paint this whole land area with Mars Black. If you need a little bit of water to boost the black to make it flow a little bit, you can dip your brush in the water and distribute it into the black. And so this is kind of what I'm doing here is the landscape perspective thing. So I'm making my land get lighter in the distance. Is it necessary? No, because the trees are going to be covering it anyway, but I'm doing it for fun. If you want, you can do this too, or you can just paint this whole area solid black and it'll be fine. But if you take a little bit of white and distribute it into that area, it's going to make a lighter black color or a dark gray color, and just paint the whole area. And then the land area right here doesn't have to be straight. You can have your land be kind of above the horizon line. I'll show you in a little bit what I'm talking about. So right here, a little bit bumpy, and that's okay because our road is going to be turning to the left, so we want our land to look like it's kind of going up as far as elevation goes and way in the distance. And so then you're going to pretty much repeat that on the left side. So gently pull your tape off, and if you have a little bit of a white gap showing between your Payne's Gray Road and your Mars Black land, that's okay because that's going to be covered by greenery, shrubbery, trees. You won't notice it in the end. I'm going to use the same piece of tape over here on the left side, and I'm going to do the exact same thing again. I'm going to start with the Mars Black, a little bit of water to get it to flow. I'm going to start at the bottom of the land and paint it in with my number 8 round brush. And I guess I didn't mention I'm doing left and right strokes, so horizontal strokes with that round brush. And kind of the same thing, start out with the black. You could add a pop of white in there for landscape perspective, but not 100% required. Go ahead and rinse your brush off and gently pull your tape up. And again, if you have any white showing through, that's okay. And we're going to go ahead and use a different brush next. We're going to use the number 4 round brush. So I'm going to do a couple things here. I'm going to get my road to twist to the left. And it may seem kind of tricky to do this, but it's actually really quite simple. So mix a shade of gray that's very similar to the one way in the distance. So mix your Payne's gray with the white so that it is that lighter gray right there. And take your road, and it's going to go above that horizon, but that's kind of why we made that land way in the distance kind of bumpy and higher to make it look like that road is turning and kind of even with that land that's a little bit higher right there. So just take it and kind of force it to turn to the left. Super simple. again with that lighter color and that really small brush. And you can kind of just take it and kind of blend it down and have your strokes curve down into the road, but it turns to the left and it sort of just disappears. Then I'm going to use the same brush to paint the lines on the road, but I'm going to rinse it off to make sure that there's no gray on my brush. Load the very tip of the brush in the white. I'm going to start way in the distance here because these lines are very, very tiny. They would be just little dots right there in the distance. And then as I go down, make sure that you're doing this right in the middle of the road, and each line is going to get longer and also wider. So if you're not feeling comfortable about this, you can always get a piece of chalk and sort of draw out your lines first, and then you can paint them in. But I'm just kind of winging it here. So just make sure that each line gets longer and wider, and the one at the very bottom goes off the canvas, and it looks really cool when it's painted um, down on the side of the canvas. But make it nice and wide and large, and that one goes off, so we don't see how long it is, but it's wider than the other one. And I'm just going to take that and just kind of make these look like they're rectangles, and they don't have to be perfect. When this white dries, we'll be painting over them with yellow, but for now they'll be white. There's another marking on the road that I'm going to make with the same brush and also white. These are the diagonal lines that are going kind of inward on the roads on the left and the right side of the road. So I'm going to rinse my brush but load it in the white again. Get the white right there on the tip of the brush. Very, very steady hand. Even if this line is shaky, that's okay. It can kind of just fade out in the distance, but start at the bottom. Leave a gap between the edge where that black is and where the Payne's gray is, and just do a line, diagonal line, and it sort of just fades out into the distance. We're going to work on the greenery part of this painting, and I'm going to go ahead and load my palette with Hooker's Green Hue Permanent, and I'm going to use my round brush to make a green. Sort of a light green. So add some white, a pop of red in there. So that pop of red actually gives your green more of a natural color. Not too much red because then it'll turn brown, but just a teeny bit of red in there gives it more of a natural green color, like I said. And so we're doing these really tiny trees that are way in the distance. And these trees, like, we're not even painting them to look like they have branches. They're very, very abstract. So I'm just painting these little blobs, vertical blobs, I guess you can call it, right there where that road turns. They're on the other side of the road. So they're not on the front part, but on the right side of the road. And these vertical blobs, as I'm going to call them, are, again, very abstract, little tick mark lines way in the distance. They're very, very tiny where that road sort of disappears. You can make a few kind of go higher than the mountain if you want, but look how small they are. They're very far in the distance, and that's what we want. We don't want anything larger. We don't see any tree trunks. We don't see branches. We don't see anything like that. I'm going to rinse my brush and set it to the side, and I'm going to grab a number 4 fan brush. This is a Royal and Langnickel fan brush, and I'll link it in the description if you wanted to find this exact fan brush. And so I'm just going to grab that lighter green, but also grab a bunch of that hooker's green. And actually, I'm going to go even darker here. I'm going to grab the Mars Black. You can even grab the Payne's Gray if you want, but the point is that we need to make a very, very dark green. So dark that it almost looks black. So like black, a blackish green color, super dark. And I like to water it down slightly. So I take my fan brush and kind of dip it in the water, but then load it so that it's going to be loose and not chunky. So right there is the top part of my tree. So this tree, there's the top piece. And this one is our furthest tree in the distance because the other two are going to get larger. And so I'm just going to tap my brush, and at the top part of the tree doesn't have the branches aren't very wide, so you'll have to hold your brush at an angle to get very, very smaller strokes. But as you work your way down, going in a zigzag motion, just tapping right there on the tip. So the top, you're only using like maybe the corner of that fan brush, but then as you get lower, you'll end up using the full width, and you'll tap your brush left and right to form the shape, the cone shape of the tree. And so each tree, we're going to do 3 trees on each side, so it's kind of a staircase. This will give our 1 point perspective look because each tree is getting much, much larger. So same concept. I'd start at the top with your tree, tap very lightly, hold your brush in an angle to make your branches small or not as wide. And as you work your way down, going in a zigzag motion, you want to use the full width of the brush. So I'm not having my tree branches overlap the road at all. I'm just letting them sort of magically disappear at the bottom because it's nice and dark at the bottom. We don't see the trunks. We're not sure what's happening. It just kind of blends in with the dark area at the bottom. But we'll add some lighter parts later. But for now, we're just using this dark green color to form our tree. So this one's a little tricky because it's bigger, but it also goes off the canvas. So we're just going to kind of have to estimate how it goes off the canvas. So we may even only see half the tree, but still I'm doing the full width of the bristles left and right. And our trees are going to look a little bare and not so full yet, but this is only the first layer. I'm going to add a second layer to this tree in the front. So I'm just mixing on my palette more of that really, really dark green. And I'm just taking this and I'm adding pretty much a second layer to this first tree way in the foreground. And I didn't do a second layer to the other 2 trees yet. I will add lighter green shades to the other trees, but I'll do that later. So I'm going to repeat the same things on the left. So starting with this smaller tree, making sure that the top part is pretty level with the tree on the right, and using my fan brush, using just the corner of it. I don't want to use the full width at first because my tree's not that wide. It's not that big at the top. But then as I go down towards the bottom, my tree gets larger and wider. Then I can use the full width of the fan brush. Then I'm going to go ahead and do my second tree. So again, make sure that the top pieces are lined up with the pieces that are on the left and the right. And remember that trees are going, it's 1 point perspective painting, so you got to make sure the tops of the trees are going diagonally, forming a diagonal. And then so same thing with the fan brush technique for this tree. And then repeat that for the larger tree that's in the front. So if we wanted to leave our trees nice and dark in this painting, that's fine. They can be more of a silhouette style tree, but I wanted to make it look like there's more greenery showing with this tree. So I'm going to do a second layer on all my trees with just green, and I'm not going to rinse my brush off. I'm just going to wipe it off and load it with Hooker's green. So this is just the green, a little bit of water for the flow. And I'm just going to take it, sorry, my hand is covering right there, and I'm just going to add a second layer. I'm going to do maybe a pop of red in there, give it that more natural look in the tree, but it's still lighter. And I'm just taking it, and I'm not trying to cover up my entire tree per se. I'm using this lighter green to make it look like my trees are more green and not so much a silhouette. So I'm just taking that and I'm applying it to as a second layer, not covering up the green, just a few taps here and there with the green, but still using the same technique of tapping the brush left and right, kind of going in a zigzag formation. And I'm going to do that to all my trees. So a little bit, a pop of lighter green on this tree and a little bit of a pop of lighter green on the other two trees as well. And then I'm actually going to be taking this another step further and adding a third layer of a lighter green. So you can see already how it turned our silhouette looking trees into more of a greenery. And to take this a step further, if you want to add a third layer of lighter, grab a pop of white. So just a little bit of white on the fan brush, distribute it so it's kind of a light olive green sort of color. And just be careful with this super light green because it can take over super fast, especially if you have too much white on it. It may look like there's snow on the tree, but that pop of lighter green is going to give our tree enough highlight to make it look like the tree has some dimension and the light's hitting the branches different ways. We don't see any of the trunks in the trees. I suppose if you wanted to go in and add some trunks, you can, but for simplification purposes, I didn't do the trunks. They're just kind of hidden. And just tapping the lighter green here and there. I will be using a different brush next to kind of add some more shrubbery on the bottom next to the road, so it's not just a blank black ground. But I'm going to go ahead, rinse my fan brush and set it to the side. I'm going to grab what's called a bristle brush. So a bristle brush has the natural sort of uh, bristles. They're not the soft synthetic ones. I think I might be the hog hair brush, but this is a super cheap brush that I've had for a while. I don't even know what brand it is or if it even has a brand, but I only use these when I need to do texture, and a lot of times it's texture in landscape painting because of the coarse feeling of the bristles. So I'm going to take the green and the light green and just a combination of a whole bunch of greens here. I'm just taking that and I'm tapping the brush and it's creating that texture right away, kind of stippling it. So it's creating some abstract shrubbery on the side of the road. You can have it overlap your road a little bit if you wanted it to look like maybe some of the land or some of the foliage is kind of growing over the road, but I didn't want to cover up too much of the road. And so that lighter green will really show up when you add a pop of that lighter green in there. And just kind of all over throughout that ground area. So it just gives that ground area texture versus if it was just solid black and kind of not really anything on the bottom. But it kind of adds to the area, kind of fills it up, makes it look more full. You can even kind of curve your land a little bit to make it look like maybe the land is kind of higher than the road and it kind of goes up at an angle. Or just try to keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate it. few patches of lighter, and then you can go back and add a few patches of darker. Just fill in the rest of the black area that may still be showing through. So when you're done with that, we're going to go ahead and, assuming our white lines are dry by now, we're actually going to paint them in yellow. So this is Cadmium Yellow Medium Hue. You can use any yellow for this. If you have a lemon yellow or pretty much any yellow, or you can leave your lines white. You don't have to paint them yellow. But I'm just going to go ahead and paint over all my white lines with yellow. And this is that number 4 round brush. Those white lines that are on the left and right of the road, I did not paint over those yellow. Those stayed white in this painting. And so what I'm going to do next is I am actually going to paint some more trees in the distance. I wanted to add a few more pops of trees over here. Maybe even add a few that do have the branches, but they're still very small and very much in the distance. So a few little tiny indications that there's some trees where we can actually see the branches, but we don't want to make them too tall because that part is way out there. And also, I decided to add a bit more of mountain range to this painting. So I did a light gray again, and I wanted it to be lighter than the first mountain range I did, and I mixed it with Mars Black. So it's going to look like a different shade of gray because my other mountain range was actually done with Payne's gray. So this is white mixed with a little bit of Mars Black. And I just took my mountain and added one that's even behind that one, way in the distance. So it looks like that mountain is far away. And then a few more vertical blobs of trees way in the distance. Can't have enough of those apparently. The final steps in this painting include painting the clouds, and this is a little bit of a tricky step, but I'm going to do my best to explain what I'm doing here. I am going to freshen up some Quinacridone Magenta on my palette, and I'll be using a different brush. This is a number 12 bright brush, so it's a flat brush that's got short bristles. And I'm going to make a very dark magenta color, teeny tiny bit of Payne's gray into the magenta. So mix a little bit of Payne's into magenta, and it's going to make a dark magenta, a very dark purple looking color. It's almost going to look black, but it's not going to be black. Wipe your brush on the paper towel because we're going to do this dry brush style. And I'm going to very gently tap my cloud. So my cloud is going at an angle here. It's not going horizontal in the sky. It's going at an angle because it's a perspective painting. And I'm just going to form the shape of my cloud by painting small circular strokes using the tip of my brush. Now, if your paint is going on too thick, or you cannot see the sky through your paint, you need to wipe off more of it. So these are dry brush style clouds. It's very translucent and thin, little circular strokes, but very dry, not thick at all. And it's going to make it look more like a fluffy cloud when the paint doesn't have, or when the brush doesn't have a lot of paint on it. And whoa, my hand is covering that right there, but I'm basically doing the same thing. Small circular strokes going in a diagonal direction. Clouds lower in the sky, closest to the horizon, are smaller. So these ones are also going at an angle, but they're smaller. These ones are going at an angle, but they're barely little puffs of something down there, little puffs of clouds at an angle, but we can barely see them. They're so small. So the clouds are larger up higher in the sky. They have more form. And I'm really working my brush here. There's hardly any paint left on it. I didn't go reload or anything because they're dry brush style clouds. We don't want to use a lot of paint to create these type of clouds. So we started with a darker color for a reason, because these are sunset clouds that are going to have highlights on the bottom. So I'm going to mix a very light, I didn't rinse my brush, so there is still that color on my brush, that dark gray purple color on my brush. And I grabbed a little bit of white, teeny bit of magenta on there. This is going to be a lighter version of that color because there's white in it. And you're going to do the same thing. Load it in that brush, but wipe it off with your rag so that it's dry. Now the light would be showing on the bottom of the clouds because that's where the light in the sky is. The sun is setting below the horizon. And so that's where the light would be. It wouldn't be on the top of the clouds, it would be on the bottom. So that was a little much, so I actually wiped off more of that. So it's super dry. And same thing, I'm tapping my brush, going in sort of circular strokes on the bottom. And I'm not going to cover the whole cloud. I'm just adding that lighter area right there on the bottom of the cloud and on the bottom of pretty much every cloud. So these little tiny puffs that are closer to the horizon, we would see a little bit of white, but there wouldn't be much detail in there. And I'm going to get some more white on this cloud, but make sure it's just on the very bottom edge of it. If it seems like the white is too strong, just wipe off more of it with your rag and go back in there again. And I'm just adding circular strokes. I'm kind of just blending it right now, kind of painting over the area where sort of that darker gray meets the white. Again, very little paint on my brush. I keep saying that, I know. And just a few little puffs of the lighter white right there on the bottom of the clouds. And way in the distance, we don't really see much detail. And try to make sure your clouds are going at an angle because of the perspective of this painting. The clouds would be going in that 1 point perspective rule as well. I'm going to go ahead and add a pop of a little bit of a brighter white. I didn't didn't wipe my brush off that time, but I know this one is only going to be very, very subtle, like a dab of that white. You can see what effect that does. Just adding that super bright white right there on the bottom really gives our cloud that extra sort of boost it needs, that brightest part of the cloud where that light is really hitting it. And it doesn't really go much else, just a few little dabs of it right on the bottom of each of the clouds. The last thing I'm going to do with this painting is a few touch-ups with the trees. So I wanted to add some more brighter areas in the trees. I grabbed my fan brush again and have my green. I wanted to mix a little bit of a lighter green. So I loaded some more titanium white on my palette, and I'm going to distribute that titanium white into that lighter green. And I'm not going to go crazy here, but just a few pops of that really light green in there is going to make some of our trees stand out. So I'm just going to go in and add that lighter green to each of my trees. Same technique though with the fan brush, just gently tapping it. We're not trying to cover up our trees at all. We're just adding a few pops of the lighter green. Next, I'm going to go ahead and touch up my road with the yellow. Just a few touch-ups in there. Kind of fix up some of my lines, and I'm also going to make it look like my road line is going off the canvas on the side of the canvas. This painting tutorial is coming to its conclusion. I'm going to go ahead and sign my name with this, I believe it's a 0 round brush and titanium white over here in the lower left corner. I'm going to sign my name. And that is it. That is the conclusion of how to paint this road painting. And I forgot to do the sides of the trees. I just, super easy, just grab a flat brush, grab some green, slap some green and darker color on there. It doesn't have to look like that tree was already painted. So I'm going to just go ahead and do that. But that's it. I really loved doing this painting. There's something about road paintings, the symbolism in road paintings. It's beautiful. I love that this is my last painting for 2020, so it's a sign of good things to come. Thanks for watching.